Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So today we're going to be talking about how to use one die 3 ways. Dies can be fairly expensive. So by understanding different ways you can use the same die over and over again to come up with very unique designs, that is a way that you can extend the use of a die in your creative practice. So the die I'm using today is this Frosty and Bright die from Crafter's Companion. And what I would like to point out about this die is that it has 2 pieces, and why it has 2 pieces gives it a lot more versatility. It has the intricate design, and you'll notice that there is no strong edge to this die, but it does have a piece that will go over top of it that will give you a strong edge along one edge. This piece here, you'll notice it doesn't have the same bumps along it, and that means that you're not going to get a cut line from this. If you compare this to normal dies, for example, this die here, you can see all these raised areas. That's everything that's going to cut. It's going to cut out a complete snowflake. In this die, it's going to cut out the edges, but because there doesn't have a center edge here, that means it's not going to cut out the center here, which is going to give you basically a snowflake that has a circle area inside that is blank. So I just wanted to show that to you so you understand the difference between some of these dies. These kind of off the page dies are available, and what makes them so unique is that they are able to give you an edge here while still being able to have paper on the other side. The other nice thing about that is you can basically cut them. In this one I actually did it all the way to the edge. I left a little bit of a border there, but you can basically cut the shape without actually cutting the paper itself. So what's neat about this is it does give you some options for whether or not you're going to have a cut edge or if you're going to just leave it with the design in the center. It opens up a lot of creative possibilities. So how I built these cards is instead of using a pattern paper, which would be very easy to use, just regular plain cardstock, I use Brusho crystal colors to make my own unique paper. And so I'm going to show you a really quick demo on that before we move on to the project. So I am using 140-pound cold pressed watercolor paper for this. I happen to have a set of the speedball paper, and I'm just going to be using a sheet of it just to show you how to use the Brusho crystal colors. So for this project, I'm going to be using both the Brusho crystal colors as well as Nuvo shimmer powder. I have a few colors of Nuvo shimmer powder that I recently purchased, and I'm going to be using them in this project. What both Brushos and the Nuvo shimmer powders are basically a watercolor medium in a powder form. So these are highly pigmented and they're beautiful for adding to your projects. The one thing is that the Brusho crystal colors are much more pigmented than the Nuvo shimmer powders, but the Nuvo shimmer powders have shine and mica in them. And so even though they're less pigmented, they work really well with the Brushos just to add a little bit of shine to your project. I like using them both together, and that's why I have more Brushos than the Nuvos, is because the Brushos, I like that for the high pigment, I like the Nuvos for the shine. And so basically what you're doing is just adding a little bit to your surface. You might notice I have a pin on top of these. If you get the Brushos, do not open the lid. You're gonna make a huge mess and you're gonna find that it's gonna be very challenging to keep them tidy. Instead, just put a pin on the top. It gives you enough to add to your project without overwhelming or making a huge mess with the colors. I'm gonna add in a little bit of purple here in a couple spots. I'm going to continue on. It might be a little hard to see the color of these on the page. The reason I am doing so much color, I would usually add a little bit and then add some water, add a little bit more, add some water, but in this case, I want to get a solid color with just one go with the mister. So once you add these to your page, you want to mist it. And you can see that they start moving right away. And this is like the beauty and the magic of the Brushos and the shimmer powders, is they do give that shimmer, they give gorgeous color. And you can see right now that the areas with more water are blending more together. The areas I've only spritzed a little bit are staying pretty textured and a little bit brighter. So you have choices. You can either add in a lot of water to get this really soft blend, or you can go and just add in more powder to keep these colors fairly textured. It depends on the look you're looking for your project. And this is where with die cuts, it's kind of nice to be able to add in a little bit of that extra texture. And so going over some of those areas again that I just added more powder. and then that's blending out. So this is where you could go in with a heat tool and you could just dry it. In this case, I've already done a few samples of this, so I'm gonna set this aside to let it dry and just show you some of the samples I've already used. You'll notice that as this dries, it's gonna dry a little bit lighter, so just be aware of that when you're adding your colors. If you're a little bit disappointed with the color, just continue to add more and more color until you get the final look that you desire. So for the sake of moving this project along, I just wanted to show you a few different samples I've done. This one I've done mostly with just blues and greens. And you can see in areas here, I've added a little bit of that shimmer. It has a little bit of those silver spots throughout the page. And this one I did mostly in greens and blacks. And this one I didn't add in any of the shimmer powder to the surface. This one here, I added in a lot of the purple because you can see that each of the shimmer powders has a different color, either purple, pink, gray. And so you can see that in these areas it's gray, in this area it's purple. In this case, a lot of the purple with the Brushos as well. So I do find that I like the combination because the Brushos will give you the stronger pigment. The Nuvos will give you that shimmer. And then this is another example with pinks and purples that I think is really beautiful. And then these are parts of other ones I've done. And you can see that even just with one color mix, I think I used the same 3 or 4 colors with these ones. You get a huge variation of color depending if you stick with more of the reds, pinks, the blues, or the purples. So there's lots of options with this, and that's why I like using watercolor paper and using Brushos, because you get a lot of different color mixes and it gives a lot of variation to your card project. I'm starting with a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 paper, and that's going to be a standard card size. And you can see that this die will basically fit perfectly into that card size. So if I only want to do it as half an image, like I've done with this card, because I do want an area where that white shows through, I'm just going to basically add it like this. So I'm using the die cutting machine that I have. This is a motorized Tim Holtz Vagabond 2. This has now been replaced by the Sizzix Switch, but really any die machine that you have will work for this. I had a Big Shot for a lot of years. That was a crank handled one, but this is the one that I really love to use, especially for intricate dies, just because it is able to provide more pressure than what you can with your hand cranked ones, which gives you much better results. So every machine's different. So when I'm using my die cut machine, I have a thin die adapter for these thinner dies. And so I need to add that to my sandwich. And then basically I have several plates that I will use to get my shape. And you'll notice that some of my plates are a bit warped. That's just what happens over time as you add them through the machine. And so I keep flipping them backwards and forwards to try to keep them from getting too ratched, but it's something to be aware of. And I will show you what I would consider the more traditional way of doing this. I have a precision base that I'll also show you how to use, but for now I want to show you how to do just basically a basic die cut. So I'm just adding a piece of washi tape to this. The reason for that is to get a good sandwich from this machine, I need to be able to have the die on the bottom, the paper on top. And this way I'm going to make sure that it doesn't move as I put it through the machine. And then I'm just going to add a second plate on top, and I'm just running it through. And I tend to do is go back the other way. I always run it through twice. The reason you want it paper down and this face up is it will prevent you from dulling your die. It's going to give you a better impression. So don't ever do it this way unless you're using a precision plate, which I will show you in a little bit. I'm just going to pull that out, and you can see that it's given me just a beautiful image. So I believe 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 is an A2 card. So I cut the Brusho paper to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, but I don't necessarily want to keep it at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. But why I cut it a little bit bigger was so that when we need to cut it down for our card, if you ended up not cutting this perfectly even, if you ended up having this a little off kilter, now you can adjust the card so that it will fit properly and be straight. So I always like to have it a little bit bigger and then cut it down a little bit. I prefer that to not having the space I need to be able to adjust if I do make a mistake. I just removed a little bit from those edges there. And I personally like this with a little bit more of a border, which is why I have cut it this way. So now how to adhere it onto your page. And in this case, I'm putting it on a piece of white paper. This is where you could apply it just directly to the card back if you're using white card backs. But I just wanted to be able to just show this to you so that if you're using a different color card back or you have some other limitations, you're still able to do this. So I'm using art glitter glue for this. I found that you could use adhesive, but with the watercolor paper, it doesn't stay down as well. So that's why I like going in with glue that will dry clear, and just add little dots and add adhesive everywhere. Really the easiest thing to do would be to take your Brusho paper before you die cut it, add an adhesive sheet to the back. That's going to be able to save you a lot more time with this. It does increase the price of each card. So it kind of depends on whether or not you're on a budget or you're looking for ease of use. And this is where it can get a bit sticky. So I'm just adding a piece of paper towel over top, pulling it up. Any of those areas where you see the white glue, don't worry about it. It's going to dry clear. You're not going to see it once everything dries. The biggest thing with most of these dies is you'll notice that they have all the little pieces of white pieces of paper that are going to want to stick into the spots. So what you need to do is basically have a tool to poke out all of the little bits. I happen to have this really old Spellbinders tool that you can basically just use a little wheel over the back. I'll see if I can find a link to these ones. If not, you can always just take any sort of pokey tool and poke every spot. But what's nice about this one, it is really easy for getting all those paper pieces out of your die really, really quickly. And I'll see if they have something else. If they don't sell this one anymore, I'll see if they have something else that's helpful in this way. Because this is a really handy tool. It does save me loads and loads of time. So what's nice about this design is that basically you're only using those inner edges. You're not actually cutting anything out of the edges of this card. I like butting it up against the side, but you really could put this anywhere on your page. The other option that I haven't actually done, but you could do, is basically have a larger piece of paper and then flip it and have it on both sides of your card if you really wanted to, so that when people flip it over, they see the same image on the other side. So that's another option. So for the second card I wanted to show you how to do a three-fold card. And this three-fold card is basically using this die along the edge and using this piece here to get that really nice solid edge to it. So with this one, you want to start with a piece that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So what you want to do is basically try to butt up that die close to the edge, but because we're going to be adding this one over top, you want to make sure it's not quite all the way to the edge, but you want enough room where you have a blank area in here and that it's fairly straight. And where I like to apply my tape is the areas that's going to cut, because in that way, if the tape sticks too much, it's not going to tear the paper that you want to stamp on. Instead, it's going to tear the paper that doesn't matter. And as I said before, this part here does not have a cutting edge, but along all the other edges is the cutting edge. So what we want to do is add that on top, and you want to try to space it as evenly as you can around the die. And so that's going to give you a much more even border on that snowflake die. And so now I'll show you another option that helps, is a precision plate. This precision plate is metal. It is heavy. What it's meant to do is, instead of having it face up, that you would usually do to make sure you don't dull your dies, you actually want it face down, because what this will do is this is going to have some metal strength to it. So it's going to help you get a really good cut image. And so I'm going to do the same sandwich as I did before. Again, check your machine to understand what the requirements are for your exact model. Every model is different. So in this sandwich, I have my precision plate, my die face down, which is opposite to how we would usually do it. And then we're gonna add another plate on top. And then I'm gonna run it through one way and then run it back. And you'll see from this cut that you end up with a cut edge, and then you end up with an area that isn't cut at all. So I'm gonna remove this very carefully. But you can see that now you have the area that it cut, and now we have the area that we're going to pull up. Sometimes everything pulls up in the die itself. In this case, it pulled up on the image itself. So now you basically just have to rub it to remove some of those bits and pieces. So now that we've completed our accent piece, we want to do our tri-fold card. So for this card, you want to cut your paper 12 inches by 5 1/2 inches. So that 5 1/2 inches is going to be the same height as the card piece you just did. You want to make this a trifold card, so you want to score at 4 inches. And you want to score at 8 inches. And if you don't have a scoreboard, you just basically would need to measure and just figure out those measurements. But I like having a scoreboard. I use it a lot for different books and different projects I use. I've had one for years, so it's a very good tool for being able to measure and get really great results. My card is laying decently flat, but you can see it's pretty tight within that flap there. So the easiest way to adjust this is by just taking a tiny piece off of that inner flap, maybe like a 1/16 an 1/8 of an inch. And what that does, that allows it to lay flatter. We want to add this to here, but you could make a choice here. You could just add it like this, but what I like to do is make it a full flap like this. So what we're gonna do is take the left-hand side of our card, so that front page, and we're going to line up the die to it in the same way we did in the previous step. So this will take a little bit of figuring just to make sure that you get it nice and straight. And if you're not sure, you can always take a little bit of tape. What I'm gonna do is take my ruler and just push it up against here, just to make sure I have it very flat. I'm gonna add in the cut edge over top. I find it's easier to do the larger flap piece and then do the little edge piece next, over starting with the edge piece. And now I'm just gonna run that again through my die cutting machine. So now that you have your trifold card with one section having that image on, now what I can do is basically line up these images, and then you're gonna have a card that has that beautiful front. So I'm just gonna quickly glue this, and then I will show you what to do if you wanna add another detail to this. If you wanted to add a bit more texture to this, the next thing you could do is use an embossing folder. And so the embossing folder that I have is just an old Cuttlebug one. It happens to have snowflakes on it, and I thought the snowflake on snowflakes would be great. If you've never used an embossing folder, you basically just add a piece of paper in the folder itself and run it through your die cutting machine. This piece of paper I cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, but then I took a little bit off the one edge. And that's just gonna help this to fit a little bit nicer, because again, we did cut back that one edge in here just to make sure that you get a really good closure on your card. And then I usually just open the card. It prevents glue from getting in places you don't want it to be. And I just press it out to the edge. So with this one, it looks like I did misjudge how big my cut needed to be. So again, it's over a little bit, but that's okay. We take our scissors and we just clean up that edge. And at the end, I'll show you how to stamp on these and how to get really great results with stamping. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, hit that like button. That's a way you can support this channel and just helps more people see this video. So thank you so much for your support. So one of the things I love about this die is that even though it's meant to be just an edge die like this, or meant to be just inside the image like this, what's nice about it is you can change it into a full snowflake. It takes a little bit of effort, but the nice thing about it is then you end up with basically a full snowflake image. And what I like this for is now I can use this not only on my cards, but now on my journal pages. And I just basically line up the cutting part of the die to the other area that has been cut, just so that I have a really good lineup. And this takes usually a little bit more tape just to make sure that everything's in place. But this was not really part of the design for this die, but what I like about it is very easy to do. And there you go. So by having just one die, now you have a full image, which was not really the design of this die, but it's a really great way of just taking something that you already have and just bringing it that one step further. And you might notice that on a couple of these edges here where the die lined up, I didn't get the line up just perfect. So what I'm doing is I'm just basically just creating a little scallop there. So get rid of that little tail. And this side was a lot better. It's just those little tails there that need to be removed. And now you have a full die shape. So I could have just used a white sheet or a metallic sheet of paper to finish off this card, but what I wanted to do is use this 5 1/2 by 8 1/2 embossing folder. This one's by Spellbinders. They started making them a lot larger, which is really nice for being able to use them for a larger card. So for this one, I'm just gonna add the glue and just place it down. For this one, the snowflake isn't gonna be much bigger than the card back, but I'm gonna add in a couple matted layers before adding this to my card. So now I have our 3 different cards, and I wanted to show you a few different things you can do to finish these off. One is to use just simple little sayings, and I'm going to use peace and joy. Add your archival ink and just stamp it on your project. On these ones that are more narrow, you could use the light piece and joy, but I probably would put it over and over and over again, just so it feels a little bit more natural in the space. But what I do have is the set of Christmas time sentiments from Tim Holtz, and he has this one called Christmas Greetings. And I thought this would be perfect for adding in this spot here. And add some ink and just add it onto my stamp. And with this one, again, I like to pull it out just so that I don't have a lot of bulk. And with this area being all bumpy, I didn't want to affect my stamping. And there you go. And so now we have a really strong Christmas greetings along the side, and I think that looks really great. And on this last one, what I'm going to do is just basically add in some die cut letters. You could use a sentiment, you could really use anything. And so in this case, I'm just going to use the word peace. I'm going to use a black cardstock as a mat on this card, so this is perfect. Just add a little bit of the clear glue and adhere it to your project. With this die, you can see that even though it is a snowflake die, you can make full snowflakes, you can have in subtractive snowflakes, or you can have them as those edge snowflakes. There's a lot of options with this. When choosing a die, you need to find one that has a lot of uses. I find the same thing with stamps. You can find stamps that are really cool, but then the problem with it is they may only be nice for one project, maybe two projects, and then you have them sitting in your collection for years and years. I have stamps that I thought were cool at the time, I've never used. And that's the problem, is sometimes we get really excited about buying things and we don't actually use them. So I wanted to share with you how you could just use one die so that you could see a bunch of different ways you could use one image. So as a bonus to this video, I wanted to show you another way you could do it. You could reverse what's on top. In this case, I started with the white and added in a piece of the Brusho watercolor paper just to add a little bit of back color. With this one, I did the same thing, and that looks really good as well. And the same with this one. And with this one, because I did make a little bit of a mistake, I ended up damaging the paper when it was removing the tape. I just added in a little bit of shimmer spray to that. So you can see by just having one shape, you can do a lot of different variations to the same card. These all are almost part of a series or as a family of cards. And that's what's really cool about it, is that you don't necessarily have to have a ton of different things to be able to create really unique cards. And that was the point. The point was, how do we create 3 cards with one die? In this case, it's really 6 cards when all is said and done. And so if you've enjoyed this video, if you could like, subscribe, and just hit that notification button so you don't miss out on any future videos. You can see all the supplies that I use below. I've included all the colors I've used just so you're aware of the color combinations I have used for this project. And if you are interested in another video about Brushos and how to use them with die cuts, click here. This is another video that I did, and people loved this particular card, and I got a lot of really positive comments about it. So I would love for you to check it out, and hopefully that gives you even more ideas on how to use dies with your Christmas cards this year. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.